So, I don't think this is new. Like, of course it's new, technically, it's from yesterday, but I don't think this idea is new at all. But we had ourselves Frank Seravalli, the main Daily Faceoff guy, make an appearance on the DFO Rundown podcast earlier yesterday on the 19th. This was the Oilers Force a Game 7 episode, and the timestamp is around the 1 hour 11 minute mark. This entire clip was tweeted out there by Habs fanatics because, per Frank Seravalli, there's a 95% chance that Mitch Marner will be traded this offseason. The two-time Selke nominee was selected 4th overall by the Maple Leafs in 2015, and many teams will likely inquire in the star winger. Now, if you listen to the clip, it's about a 1 minute-ish clip, and the full episode is, an hour plus, so it's a lot of content. But when it comes to this main Mitch Marner conversation, I wanted to just paraphrase what was going on here, just some of the ideas tossed out, because Frank Seravalli, of course, is one of the more connected NHL insiders. Sure, he gets some stuff wrong nowadays, but I think his reputation, in my mind, will always be cemented by the fact that he pretty much leaked the Seattle Kraken expansion draft minutes before the thing actually began. So, Seravalli on the podcast went out there and said, in his opinion, there is only a 5% chance that the Craig Berube, Mitch Marner experiment will actually start out, because there's a 95% chance that Marner is not even a Leaf. And this is the point of the DFO show where they start talking about the idea of a trade. What will a trade look like? Not in terms of the price, but circumstantially. What exactly could we expect out of a team that is acquiring Marner? Would a team go out there and ask for Mitch and say, okay, we're going to trade for him only if there's a contract extension attached to it? Because Mitch Marner is making $10.09 million a season. That contract expires at the end of next year, so 24-25 is the final season of that deal. He'll need an extension right away afterwards. And, as we've been talking about the entire time, this guy could very realistically gather himself an $11.5 million AAV extension, because he is legitimately good. It's just when the going gets tough, when the playoffs come around, that's when he kind of disappears. Either way, Seravalli and company debate about the question as to whether or not Marner will only be traded for, let's say, a sign-and-trade. There's another question proposed, okay, will the team just be getting Marner as a rental? Could they say that this guy is only just going to be a short-term option, not really a longer-term commitment? And Seravalli says pretty much, in his opinion, it could be anything. It could be teams looking at Mitch Marner and saying, hey, because this guy is an expiring UFA, there's a reason for teams to think about getting Marner for cheap. And that's the word that Seravalli uses in the podcast pretty much. Could we get Marner on a trade for a lot cheaper than what Marner would actually be worth? And this is kind of where I think Toronto Maple Leafs fans, if y'all were on the trade Marner train at this point, it becomes a little bit difficult to be fully level-headed about it. Because, of course, Mitch Marner is, as we had said, a good player. He's a 90-point caliber guy. Pretty much every season he's capable of getting 100 points. He just kind of falls off towards the end there. But Marner is one of the best playmakers in the league, and there's a reason why. He was one of the top wingers in salary the past few years, only behind Artemi Panarin. The fact is, he could get himself a significant pay raise, but with that in mind, it becomes a lot more difficult to fully stomach the idea, yeah, we could lose him for cheap. Either he walks in free agency in 2025, a la Johnny Gaudreau, and the Leafs get nothing for him, or they trade him for cheap. And at that point, it's like, okay, you start thinking about the panic situation, you start wondering, okay, was it really all for nothing? Marner was a top player in 2015, he was drafted high, he was producing high, he's always been a good player, but has his playoff reputation hurt him so much that this is the only avenue to go down? That you lose out on a 90-point caliber guy, near consistent 100-point caliber guy, for cheap without getting maximum value in return because his playoff reputation is so tarnished, because the Maple Leafs have fumbled that development, because they didn't have the right coaching staff to be forcing this guy to do well in the playoffs. Mitch Marner, for all intents and purposes, has the talent to be a good playoff performer. It's just, At the times when you need to see him the most, that's when he disappears. Last year, he had 14 points in 11 games, which was great, but the amount of points the guy scored versus Florida was minimal. Go back to the 22-23 season. Marner had 2 points in game number 4 when the Maple Leafs won and tried to force their hand in a comeback, and 1 point in game 2 when they lost 3-2. All these other points, 0. The rest of his production came against Tampa Bay, and admittedly, he did have a great series against Tampa Bay. It's what allowed the Maple Leafs to win, I might say. Like, wow, it doesn't take a genius to say Marner getting 6, 8, 10 points in the first 4 games against Tampa. Wow, amazing performance that totally helped the Maple Leafs winning. We know that exists inside of him. But Sheldon Keefe and co. just couldn't get it out, and now Seravalli's saying, yeah, there's only a 5% chance we'll even live to see the idea of Berube coaching Marner come to light, because there's a 95% chance he gets traded, and teams are thinking about getting him for cheap. So let me know your thoughts in the comments section below about the idea of a Mitch Marner trade, and what cheap, quote-unquote, really means. If it's a sign and trade, if it's a short-term rental situation, what do you think the price tag is for a guy like Marner? We just talked about this like the other day, but if you were trying to evaluate Marner, like for real, if you're talking to me personally, like I'm saying 90-point caliber guy in the midst of his prime, 27 years old, disregard the contract, Marner is definitely a guy who is worth maybe like 2, 3 first-round picks and a really good prospect, if not a really good roster player who's under the age of 25 already. Like, Mitch Marners don't grow on trees. For all the criticism and all the poor play that he exhibits in the postseason, he's a very talented guy. It's almost like a baffling transformation every time he gets into the playoffs and he stops producing, because the one time he did go out there and produce, the Leafs ended up winning their first-round series in 20 years. So we know the talent is there, but with the circumstances at hand, with the Toronto Maple Leafs being in this vulnerable spot, with the core being shaken up, with all the insiders, Friedman, Seravalli saying that big changes are on the horizon, only Matthews and Nylander are essentially the untouchables on this team, everybody is looking at the Toronto Maple Leafs like vultures. Hey, can we get this guy for cheap? And what exactly is that cheap? The Calgary Flames lost out on Johnny Gaudreau for nothing. That was Brad Treliving's last big mistake as Calgary's GM back in the day. But with the RFA negotiation with Matthew Tkachuk, there was a lot of great stuff coming out of that trade. Huberdeau, Yager. There's a opened up roster spot for Nazem Kadri with the Monahan trade as well. Treliving put in some work. So we do know that if he's tasked with the trade conversation, he can pull it off. If you give him the leeway, and if Marner is open to getting traded and waiving, then okay, I'm interested in seeing what Brad Treliving is able to cook this time. But what exactly is that price? I want you to let me know your thoughts in the comments section. Does Marner's price get reduced from maybe multiple first-round caliber assets to maybe just a first and another young prospect? A first and a mid-roster player who's just going to fill in that spot? 2 firsts, maybe? Marner's still talented, but with this reputation in mind, how much does that dwindle his overall value? It's funny because I don't think you could have this conversation about literally anybody else in the league. There's nobody else that's as good as Mitch Marner is at producing points in the regular season, who is as overpaid as Marner is, and who disappears as much as Marner does in the postseason, and who is now on a team that's looking to trade him. Like, we have never seen something like this. Pierre-Luc Dubois, Jack Eichel, they're all different because those guys were on non-playoff teams that didn't have anything going for them, and the circumstances were that they wanted to be more competitive. That's why PLD got traded to Winnipeg. That's why Eichel got traded to Vegas. And with PLD to LA, there was sort of a stranglehold there with the conversation as to where he wanted to go, which is why that trade saga went down the way it did. Marner's completely different. It's night and day. So let me know your thoughts in the comments as to where you see this entire thing going. What's the price now that Seravalli's saying, yeah, no, teams are thinking about Marner for cheap? Link will be in the description if you want to listen to the clip yourself of the DFO podcast where Seravalli says this stuff. But for now, I hope you enjoyed this video. 99 and bye.